Hi, and welcome to the Embouchure Project podcast, where we bring together the finest minds in the world to help understand the complex system that is the embouchure. The Embouchure Project represents a network of neurologists, scientists, physical therapists, psychologists, and pedagogues. The goal is to help define what a healthy embouchure is, what we can do to optimize the embouchure, and to deal with problems as they arise. A lot of our time will be devoted to embouchure dysfunction, from minor annoyances to debilitating forms of dystonia. We hope that all players, teachers and medical professionals will find this to be a rich resource. My name is Frank Sinatra. I'm a horn player with the West Australian Symphony Orchestra, founder of Brass Rehab, and on faculty as a teacher at the University of Western Australia. Thank you for joining us. We hope you find this to be informative and helpful. The Embouchure Project would like to thank the Australian Society of Performing Arts Healthcare and the Glen Gould School for their support. Today we welcome Glen Estrin, an in-demand horn player who spent years working, recording and touring as Frank Sinatra's go-to horn player. In May 1998, he lost his ability to play and was subsequently diagnosed with Embouchure Dystonia by Dr. Stephen Frucht. After an overwhelming response to an article they wrote together about the condition in the newsletter for AFM Local 802 New York, they decided to form a new support group called Musicians with Dystonia. Now called the Leon Fleisher Foundation, which is aligned with the Dystonia Medical Research Foundation. Glen has spent the last 25 years supporting and advocating for musicians with dystonia, so we're grateful to have him to join us on the podcast today.
Well, welcome and thank you, Glen. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and having a chat to us.
Pleasure to meet you. Thank you, Frankie.
Yeah, cheers. So, Glen, I think the first question I want to ask is about your career as a musician. I know you're a professional French horn player. Where did you get your start and where did it take you?
Well, I was a student at Northwestern University of the renowned French horn teacher and player Dale Clevenger. And when I was a young man, Dale started sending me out into the musical world to play shows and things in Chicago, and also the first time I ever played extra with the Chicago Symphony, I was 20 years old and ended up playing extra with Lyric Opera in Chicago, all the freelance orchestras in Chicago, and I got a very young start as a result, and really loved, of course, sitting on stage with the Chicago Symphony. How could you not? Because in those days, we're talking about the 1970s and 80s, the greatest brass section in history. So I used to joke about it with the principal trumpet, Adolf Hirst, the most, well, what can I say? He's in a class by himself as far as orchestral principal trumpet players. But when you were on stage with Bud Hirst, you felt like you were levitating, like he was pulling you up. They were amazing, amazing times. And then, of course, the bottom of the brass section was the most famous tuba player in history, Arnold Jacobs, who is the most renowned brass pedagogue also. And I was fortunate enough to study with Jake also. So they were amazing days. I had training. You could not ask for more. You really couldn't. And interesting, what happened to me down the road, I played very correctly. I could play all day and night, up and down, whatever I needed to do, because from them I learned how to correctly use my respiration to back everything I needed to do. So I was a very comfortable player my whole career. So continuing with my career, I love the commercial side. So in Chicago in those days, we were doing 150, 200 TV and radio commercials a year, which was really, really fun, really easy, and really lucrative. So we always wanted to be there for those because of the residual payments, of course.
Yeah. And you always think of the LA studios for that kind of stuff, but there was obviously a big history in Chicago.
In those days, Chicago and New York were the jingle capitals. Okay,
yeah,
TV and radio commercials. LA always the motion picture business.
Yeah,
and so that's they were doing quite well too. And as a matter of fact, a dear friend of mine who passed a couple of years ago, the same year that Dale Clevenger died, Vincent DeRosa. Do you know that name, Frankie?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So Vince is the most recorded French horn player in history, and was on every movie from Gone with the Wind to E.T. and everything in between. And well, anyway, I digress. But he was a lovely, lovely man. And well, I love commercial French horn playing as opposed to orchestral. I mean, I love both, but commercial French horn playing really was thanks to Vincent DeRosa, because starting in the 1930s and 40s, when all the arrangers and composers heard him play, they started to write phenomenal horn parts. And when these people would then, let's say they wrote incredible horn parts for two of my favorite bosses of all time, Ella Fitzgerald and Frank Sinatra. Okay. When Ella and Frank would tour, they wanted the French horn parts played. So that made another career for me, which I have to say was absolutely glorious. So I got to play with everyone from Ella, who I mentioned before, to all the great stars of the day, Johnny Mathis, Rosemary Clooney, Engelbert Humperdinck, Tom Jones. We could go on and on.
So they were quite specific about including French horn, because it's not something that you would.
Well, the reason, again, they wrote beautiful horn solos for Vincent DeRosa. And so that was, I always told Vince it was a double-edged sword, because it was great that we got an opportunity to play them, but it was terrible because everyone, including the audience, was hearing Vince in their heads. So I used to joke about it, before you take a breath, you're literally screwed. Because his brilliant playing, he was one of the greatest players of legato or smooth playing that really of anyone in history. And so to try and imitate that was very difficult, but we knew we had to. So I guess
what a time to be professional. What a time to be witnessing stuff. And so what were those guys like? Like, I mean, I think of Bud Herseth and Arnold Jacobs, like behind the scenes, like were they just practice demons, or were they really were they pretty chill, or what were they like, but
well, Arnold Jacobs was like picture Santa Claus. Okay, Arnold Jacobs was a very, very sweet, wonderful man, and philosophical, but always smiling. And one of my favorite stories, I went to hear the Chicago Symphony with Schulte, Sir Georg Schulte, who was really one of their most famous music directors, perform a live concert version of Wagner's The Flying Dutchman. And they did record it, so you can still run out and get that recording. And it's probably the greatest opera orchestra you'll ever hear. And after the performance, I was downstairs at Orchestra Hall in Chicago, and Jake came out, and I said, "Oh, Mr. Jacobs, that was really something," because I was still a young man at that time. Before he said, "Call me Jake." I said it was just magnificent. He said, "It's the kind of music makes you want to eat and drink."
I'm going to steal that.
So, that's the kind of person he was. A glowing, sweet, charismatic, wonderful man, and very, very sweet. And I will say the same thing about his counterpart on the other end of the brass section, Bud Herseth, who was really, really low-key, wonderful man who We all thought Bud knew who he was, but he never let on. So they were glorious days. He just wanted to go have a beer and go fishing, and they were just amazing times.
Yeah,
really.
wow.
And then Dale was a little more serious, and he kind of had to be because French horn is so difficult that he had to focus. You could see him in those days. All the energy and concentration in his brain was being focused down into the lead pipe. It was an amazing phenomenon. And his level of concentration was greater than anyone I've ever seen. And maybe that's why he was the most accurate principal horn player anyone ever heard. Okay, it was when Clevenger would clam a note, it'd be almost front page news of the Chicago Tribune because it never happened.
Yeah, wow.
So, I know that's his reputation, and I know the recordings are perfect, but that's the way the live performances were too. And I know because I was there. Okay, when I'm a 21-year-old student and they're playing Heldenleben, and I'm not fortunate enough to be on stage with them that week, I would go to all three performances.
Yep.
And they were amazing days. So does that help answer your question, Frankie?
I mean, you could tell me stories all night, but I think we should cover some other things. But so an amazing career. So as I understand it, you suffered from focal dystonia. So when did you first encounter your symptoms? And kind of, if you could go back to that time and explain from the inside out, like what you were feeling.
Okay. Well, in 1997, I went on vacation for 2 weeks to the British Isles with my wife, and at that time I was playing 15 to 20 services a week in New York in the recording studios and live concerts. By that time, I was, believe it or not, for almost 12 years, Frank Sinatra's lead horn player, and he took me all over the world. So he retired in 1994, and they were great times with him too, because the greatest singer who ever sang a song. So my career at that time then was more focused in New York. I wasn't touring very much. So I was on staff at the Disney's first Broadway production, Beauty and the Beast. And I'm on the cast album, and I was in the original orchestra for that. So when you weren't, going to play with New York City Ballet or the New York Chamber Symphony, you'd probably be at your show on a Tuesday night playing the score to Beauty and the Beast. That's kind of the way it worked in New York. But we were still in the studios at that time, recording with everyone from Tony Bennett to Michael Jackson. And they were fun days. But anyway, so that was my career prior to the point where I went on this 2-week vacation. And well, coincidentally, we were in London when Princess Diana died in Paris in 1997. So, but that has
everyone remembers where they were.
Right, nothing to do with the dystonia story. So I got home and went back to work and first I spent a couple of days just slowly getting back into it, and went back to work, and things felt uncomfortable. But we all know, I'm not sure about your audience here, if they are mostly musicians, but we all know about the dreaded vacation shops. And we would always get over them within the course of 3 to 5 days, let's say, and they weren't leaving. So things felt uncomfortable. And after about, I'd say, a month, I had trouble getting my lips in the mouthpiece, just forming my embouchure. And it was very strange. And so what did I do? I did what every person afflicted with dystonia tries. I practiced more, I practiced less, I practiced not at all, just showed up for work. And still things were feeling rather lousy with no explanation. after 3 months, I went to a dear friend's home who was the mouthpiece man in New York. Not that he made mouthpieces, but he had about 300 of them. So I thought I could find something with a little wider inside diameter that might help me, or anything that might help me. Anyway, changing the equipment didn't really help either. So it was a very strange progressive road for about 6 months, where I wasn't sure what was going on, but I knew I was having a lot of trouble playing. And there was nothing early on, there was nothing very evident looking in a mirror or anything to see the embouchure pull. This happened after about 6 months. And also, interestingly, my jaws started to clamp together as if they were magnetized, which you can imagine how difficult it would be to play in those circumstances. So I did what everyone would do. I went to my doctor and I explained what was going on. And my doctor said, well, I don't understand it. Put his hands on my face. Well, I don't know what's going on, but maybe you should see, go to your dentist. So I went to my dentist, and then he recommended an oral surgeon. And the oral surgeon wasn't sure what was going on at all either. So I should backtrack a little and say, I never brought my horn. It didn't occur to me this is a problem with playing. I thought this is a physiological problem of mine. So at no time did I bring my horn to any of these appointments to see what was happening in real time.
So they couldn't, so because you're not able to replicate what's going on. Yeah,
exactly. Which in retrospect, it was idiotic. But while it was going on, I was just so, again, perturbed and frustrated. Yeah. So I then went to the top oral surgeon in New York City, the type of fellow where back in 1997, it was $2,000 for the initial appointment, and you paid cash up front. And they said, if you want to apply for insurance, fine, we'll give you the information, but you pay us first.
Wow.
So, and he said, I don't know what's going on. And jaws were clamping a little bit during the appointment. And so he said, we could build you a bite plate and see if that relieves any of the problems with your jaws. And so they did. And it turns out the bite plate did alleviate some of the issue, but you can't wear it when you're playing the horn. Yep. So again, I'm not sure what's going on. I just know something's going on. So the problem got worse and worse. It got to the point where when I would get called for a recording session, I would say to my answering service, well, who else is playing horn on the session? And if they said, oh, it's just you, I would say, oh, I can't make it. Because I knew my limitations, and I did not want to be exposed too terribly if in case it were a very demanding part. So I was happy to fill out the section when it was 4 horns or something. And I was just pretty much playing my show. I played the last classical concert I played where I decided I just can't do this anymore. Was the soloist for the New York Chamber Symphony, believe it or not, was Leon Fleisher. And Leon, I find out later, is the most famous dystonia victim in musician history. But here I am deciding at my concert with Leon that the Mozart piano concerto that I had to play and the Brahms First Serenade, where fortunately I was playing 4th horn, I just couldn't do it anymore. So I stayed away from the classical concerts after that. Moving on, I just decided there had to be something going on, maybe overuse. I went to a muscle function therapist. I went to a massage therapist. They were working on my face. The oral surgeon recommended, if you can believe this, a facial chiropractor. And then started to go to acupuncturists. Yep. And after the 5th one, it turns out they all studied with the same teacher Dr. Gong in Chinatown in New York. And so I went to see Dr. Gong, and to give you an idea of what I went through. So Dr. Gong put needles in my face connected to electrical impulses. So they're going like this while I'm sitting there. And he leaves them in for about 15 minutes. And then he looks at me, he says, face not move, very bad. So he recommended a diet of a special soup of his recipe. And if you can believe this, Frankie, a colonic. He wanted me to get my colon cleaned out to help with this. And I was like, wow, I ran as fast as I could. And thought, I'm not sure what the hell is going on, but it was getting it was absolutely impossible to play. And my wife had a great opportunity to run a company down in Norfolk, Virginia for the summer months. So this started with me in September 97. And so by I guess April 98, it was clear I was having such issues, and she got this great offer. And I said, I'll go with you and I'll just take a lead from everything and see if it straightens out. It's got to be overuse. What else can it be? Even though I felt fine, things were not functioning. Okay. And there were no pain issues. There was nothing other than the inability to jump octaves and to lower my jaw enough to attack low notes. It was really, it was very, very frustrating. Very, what can I say? I kept my head above water. It's just, I just kept shrugging my shoulders. And
it's that feeling off the horn. It's you don't feel it, but as soon as that horn comes to your face, or as soon as the mouthpiece touches you, it's not doing what your brain's telling you. I mean, I've been there, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners are hearing this.
Are you?
Yep.
Are you dystonic too?
No, I had an overuse injury, but the same emotional kind of frustration that as soon as it comes up to your lip, just everything goes out the window. But sorry to interrupt you.
So I had this opportunity then to take a 3-month leave of absence from everything and run down to Virginia Beach with my wife. And I jumped at that opportunity. And I was supposed to come back in September and go on tour with New York City Ballet to the West Coast. And what happened was, down in Virginia, for a month, I didn't touch the horn at all. Mm-hmm. I thought, you hear that with overuse, abstinence is key. So I was hoping this would really help. And after a month, I tried to practice, and within minutes, the same issues happened. Within minutes. Okay. And that was the same way it would happen at home while I was still trying to play during my career. And I put the horn back in the case. I called the oral surgeon, and he recommended a couple other myofunctional therapists. And I flew up to New York and went to them, and still no relief in sight. And got back to Virginia Beach and noticed one day when I was talking to my wife, and it had nothing to do with the content of the discussion, my jaw started to clamp while I was talking.
Wow. Yeah.
So this is the first sign that there was any hint away from the horn.
Yep.
And I decided then we really have to find out what the heck is going on here. And but in the meantime, I just kind of lived with it. And the bite plate, interestingly, that was built for me months before, would help me with speaking. So I would put the bite plate in when I was speaking, and it would help. And we found out much later, this was a sensory trick with the motor section of the brain, where that bite plate in my mouth helped enough changed the motor action, that the dystonia was not triggered fully, which was quite amazing at the time. I had no idea why it helped, but it helped.
Yep.
All right. And got back to New York, had to cancel the tour with the New York City Ballet. And again, it started with the oral surgeon. And the oral surgeon said to me, I think you need a full neurological evaluation. So after a year and a quarter, I went to my first neurologist. And I started to tell him what was going on, and he diagnosed me in about a minute and a half. That was it. He said, here's what's happening. This is an occupational dystonia. And I had never heard of it like most people. And it was quite amazing. So I thought, well, that's great. And he said, there are some pharmaceuticals that can help that are systemic muscle relaxers that may help. And I thought, well, thank you. And then I thought, I'm going to call my GP, general practitioner, and ask my doctor for a referral to another neurologist just to get a second opinion. And he, same thing. He was sitting there with a clipboard. And so after my 10-minute intake, he said, well, what did the other neurologists tell you and what do you think? I said, well, he told me it was focal dystonia. And this fellow turned around the clipboard and that's what he had written. So it was pretty clear. And you are getting the long story. Is that okay, Frankie?
Yep, that's what we're here for. Yep. I like it. Yep.
Right. And so he had an idea of different medications to take.
Okay.
And they were all everything from anticholinergics to Valium to assorted others that, again, head to toe may prevent muscle spasms.
Yeah. So all the doctors, they just gave you, they just wanted to prescribe medicine. That was their only. All the neurologists only gave you kind of.
Right. They were not. They were certainly well versed, obviously, in dystonias of all varieties, but they were not forthcoming with your career is over or anything like that. All right, and so I thought, well, this is strange. I have two diverse opinions as to what medications to try, and I was in no hurry to get back to work. As a matter of fact, around that time. New York Philharmonic was doing the Alpine Symphony. And we all know about the Alpine Symphony. We love it because everyone in town is working because it's 20 French horn parts. But I had played it with the Chicago Symphony in the backstage part, which was about 45 seconds long. And from out front, it just sounds like barking dogs. And I thought, wow, to play backstage in the Alpine Symphony, well, I don't know. Maybe I should. And then that, if it ends up that my last gig ever was in New York Philharmonic, that's okay, right? So anyway, I
just want. So when you got that formal diagnosis, did that? You must have felt some relief that you could put a label to it, and then you could kind of move forward with something.
Yes, without question. And as part of by the way, I turned down the Philharmonic because it was 4 performances and 4 rehearsals. So 8 services. I thought I've never really, in my whole career, I've never shown up to work where I couldn't put something on the table. And it turns out it was a brilliant decision to turn it down because Phil Myers, the principal of the New York Philharmonic at that time, who was, I knew Phil because I worked with him a heck of a lot in the studios, and he was bordering on psychopathic. He was a very ill man, and I know that's his reputation. And I'm sorry, Phil, if you're watching the podcast, that was your reputation. I always had a good time with you. But anyway, it turns out that Phil Myers decided to go backstage and play the first horn part in the backstage horns. And
it's hard.
he had, right. So he added a rehearsal where my friends who played extra told me it was a nightmare because he went down the line and said, let me hear you, let me hear you, let me hear you. So it was really potential disaster if I had accepted. Yeah. So you as a horn player and the musicians that are listening, you can understand why it was a prescient decision to not do it.
I think your whole story also highlights something that's really common for musicians, especially freelancers. You know, who do you turn? You can't turn to your employers and go like, "Look, I'm having issues." Like you've got to do these things where you just turn down gigs. Like, oh no, I'm busy, or it's a real puts you in a real pickle. You know that
absolutely.
Like you can't just like you said, you can't come to work and put everything on the table. You know, you're going through this tough thing, but who do you talk to? It's
right.
Yeah, it's really hard.
So then at that point, I decided I'll go see the master. A woman named Alice Branfenbrenner was the most renowned and published performing arts medicine specialist really on the planet. As a matter of fact, she started performing arts medicine, like sports medicine, as a specialty with Richard Letterman, who was a neurologist at the Cleveland Clinic. And I thought, I'll go see Dr. Branfenbrenner and see what she has to say. And I went in and she was hemming and hawing. I did bring my horn and play for her. And I said, you can give it to me straight. It's okay, Dr. Branfenbrenner. She said, well, it's dystonia. And with your very severe case, it's a career-ending problem. Gosh. And so I said, well, that's okay. There's a whole world out there. And she just shook her head and said, my God, that's the healthiest attitude I've ever heard.
Yeah.
And so when we started the foundation, every time I saw Alice, she would say, you still have the healthiest attitude I've ever heard, through the years when we were at different conferences together.
But surely that must have still been hard for you to hear. I mean, I know that, you obviously had a really healthy attitude towards your, who you were and stuff. But
Frankie, interestingly, I was very, very, very fortunate. In those days, in the late 90s, it was easy to think if the Chicago Symphony called me today, sitting on that stage wouldn't be anything like it was in the heyday.
Yeah.
All right. And the other thing, really one of my most cherished memories of my career was every show with Frank Sinatra was like the first one, because he was such a great artist and sang every song differently every night. And we did a different show every night with different songs. And it was just, it was utopia. It really was. It was nirvana. So when he hung it up in Japan, of all places, we were in Fukuoka, Japan, on the island of Kyushu, and he had 2 nights back to back in a 30,000 seat baseball stadium that was packed. And he came in the locker room and he said, guys, I'm tired. I want to go fishing. And so never came back. They canceled the following month, January of 1995. We were supposed to be on tour in Florida for 2 weeks. They canceled that. They canceled March, and he just never came back. But he was 79 years old.
Yep.
So I was there at the very end in Fukuoka, December 20th, 1994. And as far as what got my juices flowing, those things weren't happening as much. All right. I played Beauty and the Beast 900 times.
Yeah.
And it ran, actually, I was there. I wasn't even there half the time. And it ran 14 years. And I had to leave after 4 years. But all of a sudden, and Frankie, you'll understand this, I was able to go out to dinner with my wife and friends on a Saturday night.
That's right. Yeah.
Which, when the world is at play, musicians are at work. So this is a great opportunity. To live like a human being. It really was. So anyway, the question was, could I play? So Dr. Branfenbrenner, I flew to Chicago to see her. She was at Northwestern University Hospital in Chicago. And I said, could I get a referral from you for New York City to get whatever therapies carried out? And so she referred me to Columbia Presbyterian, which the Neurological Institute there is probably the greatest on the planet. 12 floors of all neurologists of every specialty. And one of the kings of dystonia, Stanley Fahn, was the head of the department there. And so he couldn't see me for 8 months. And his second in command, who was also referred to me, couldn't see me for 4 months. So I said to the administrative assistant, I'm a musician. I've been diagnosed with focal dystonia, and whatever treatment possible, I would just like to get it carried out at your institution. And she said, musician, hold on a second. And she came back on the line. She said, can you come in tomorrow? And it turns out there was a fellow at Columbia Presbyterian being trained there that was interested in seeing musicians. And so I show up the next day and I meet Dr. Stephen Frucht. And Dr. Frucht is an absolutely wonderful man. My intake with him was 2 hours. He videoed me playing, talking, everything else. And this is really something. He excused himself from the room and came back with Stanley Fahn, the head of the department. Right, who couldn't see me for 8 months, and he diagnosed me too.
Yeah.
So it was an amazing appointment, and
that's the first time you two met, obviously.
Yes, and there was an initial bonding. I think without question, he says it and I say it. So I guess it really happened. But
that's fantastic.
Yeah, it was.
And so obviously that brings us to the Dystonia Medical Research Foundation that you and Dr. Frucht run. Can you tell, what is that? How did that come about?
So about my third or fourth appointment, he tried me on different medications. He started in those days, they were trying, the number one course of therapy for dystonia is injections of botulinum toxin or Botox. And so he was shooting me in the jaws. He was shooting me around the lips and the orbicularis muscles. He really, really wanted me to play. And it wasn't effective, which now we knew. I was a guinea pig. Within a couple of years after that, they decided Botox is really not effective with embouchure dystonia, whereas it is effective with hand dystonia and with every other variety of dystonia. Because do you understand the mechanics of Botox, Frankie? The mechanics are basically it's the most toxic substance on Earth. It's 6 million times more toxic than snake venom. And so it's been funneled into a strength where it can be injected locally into humans, into their muscles, and they can tolerate it, even though it's a toxic substance. So when they inject the muscle, it paralyzes them so that the excess chemicals, brain chemicals that are spasming you, are prevented from fully reaching the muscle. Okay, so when they inject the neuromuscular junction, they're preventing those errant signals from getting all the way to the muscle that is the problem. So with embouchures, as I said, they found out pretty ineffective, mainly because I think it's because the embouchure is one big picture. It either works or it doesn't. So if you can work your way around with a mild case of dystonia and change your position a little without thwarting your technique too much, that will help you. But unfortunately, injections won't. And that's what we found over the last 20 years.
Yeah. So at that time, did they realize that Botox was could kind of cover up symptoms, but it wouldn't be a cure? Or were they treating
Exactly.
Botox as a cure? Or what was the attitude towards it at that time?
Right. Botox, from the early days of Botox, what did it do? It treated symptoms. Okay.
Yeah.
With dystonia, there's no real prevention, there's no real cure.
Yeah.
All right. And that's a very, very important message, which when we wrap up, I will reiterate. And that is, if you're a musician with focal dystonia, it's not your fault. The motor section of the brain turned against you. All right. And that's exactly what happened. If you were a ditch digger, you never would have found out about dystonia because you were doing gross motor skills. But if you're a professional musician who does the finest of the fine motor skills, which is why the greatest occurrence occupationally is with musicians, 1 to 2%, which is a huge number. All right. Now, professional golfers, when they're putting, that have a dystonic reaction, that's a very small percentage, but devastating to great golfers. And there are some out there. A renowned German golfer who's the most winning golfer on the senior tour, Bernhard Langer. I don't know if you're a golf fan, but anyway, Langer, his dystonia prevented him from putting, and they suggested changing to a different position with a long putter where he reversed his hands. Instead of holding them like this, he was holding them like this with the long putter. If you've ever seen a long putter, saved his career, and the dystonia has not kicked in with the new position. So that's miraculous too. So anyway, or a surgeon with a scalpel, or a dentist with a drill, or a writer with writer's cramp dystonia, which is the general terminology for all of these task-specific dystonias. But
I guess it's similar to I had this experience, and a number of people that we've met up with have had this experience. With horn playing or trumpet playing, there's no way they could produce a note, but give them a tuba mouthpiece and a tuba or a trombone, you're totally fine, because it's just a little bit. Just the makeup of what muscles are used is slightly different, and it just bypasses everything.
Yes, and that what you just said sums up what happens with the muscles. Okay, if you fool the movement, all right, you can try and somehow fool the brain, although it's very, very difficult. Yeah.
So the Dystonia Medical Research Foundation, what are you set that up with Frucht, and what are you trying to achieve?
All right, we'll go back to a third or fourth appointment. Dr. Frucht said to me, your story, 1.25 years to correct diagnosis with dozens of healthcare practitioners, and many, by the way, saying you need a psychiatric evaluation. You can't do your job. It's got to be in your head. So I fortunately had a strong enough sense of myself that I knew that was not the case. But many people were on the couch for 10 years with head shrinkers trying to determine what was going on. And that's what Dr. Frucht told me. We have stories of musicians 5 years, 10 years until correct diagnosis. And you're almost one of the lucky ones at a little over a year. And I was just, the wheel started turning in my head and in his head. He said, I have a question for you. How can we create some awareness so the musicians don't face this anymore? And so I thought about it, and I called the Musicians Union in New York, which had a monthly newspaper, because that was the largest musicians union in the country. And I said, how would you like an article on dystonia written by a neurologist at Columbia Presbyterian? And they were like, we'd love one. And so I called Dr. Frucht and told him they'd like an article and gave him the parameters. So he wrote an article. When he submitted it, the editor of the paper called me and said, we'd like to accompany it with an interview with you. So I said, absolutely, sure. And so when the article came out a month later, my phone started to ring off the hook, and people saying, this is what happened to me. I thought I just lost my lip. Or I thought the finger curling was a muscular problem, not a neurological problem. And
Yeah.
Dr. Frucht got, I believe, 35 new patients the first month.
Yeah.
And so my wife, listening to all these phone calls every night, said, you should really start a foundation. So I met with Dr. Steve, and we decided what we wanted to do, how we wanted to help musicians. And there were three real key ways. And one is, of course, information. Information is key, and creating awareness. Secondly, support.
Yeah.
All right, because it's an incredibly trying emotional issue when you find out not only can you not do your passion, but you can't support your family.
Yeah.
And then thirdly, medical referrals. So we started to set up a medical network around the world of movement disorder neurologists that could recognize what was happening with musicians, top experts.
Yeah.
So that was our plan. We started to look for pro bono, legal, and accounting to have our Musicians with Dystonia Foundation started. And Steve Frucht was down the hall from Dr. Stanley Fahn, who you've heard me mention earlier. And Dr. Fahn was one of the chief medical people with the Dystonia Medical Research Foundation, which is the largest dystonia foundation on the planet. And he said, you're a natural for them. They've been looking for a conduit to the musician community for many, many years. And this is perfect. And so the executive director of the foundation and the president flew into New York to meet with Steve and me. And they said, we'd really like you to operate as a program entity of ours. And so they started to throw out ideas, and we initially we just decided for fundraising, all our money would go to the not-for-profit Dystonia Medical Research Foundation, but their science board would have discretion over how the funds are used for research.
Yeah.
And that was a key thing for them, and it made our lives. I will say, our lives were made much easier because they printed the business cards, they printed the brochures, they created the websites, they did all of that, and so all we had to do was take care of the patients. And Steve was willing to see patients, and I will say, bless his heart, he saw many of them. He squeezed them in. Even though he was so busy at the time. By this time, he had been invited to become an attending physician at Columbia. So he went from fellowship to becoming an MD at Columbia Presbyterian. And since then, since Dr. Fahn was still hanging around all these years, I mean, they made him emeritus. Steve had offers from all over the country, but accepted one to be the head at Mount Sinai. So he became the head of movement disorders at Mount Sinai in New York. And then he started, I believe, 5 years ago now with NYU, which last year was rated the top neurological hospital in the country. So New York University Langone is a great center, and Dr. Frucht is the head of movement disorder neurology there.
Yeah, wow.
So
in your work with Dr. Frucht, obviously he covers a whole bunch of dystonias, so musicians' dystonias with piano, guitar, all instruments. But how, in your work, how would you say that embouchure dystonia differs from the other musicians' dystonia? So, I mean, you touched on the way that Botox doesn't work, but what other things have you found that differ from the other dystonias?
I will say, if you're a musician, if you're a principal player in an orchestra, it's usually career-ending problem, without question. Whether it's if you're a violinist, where it happens on the fingerboard, of where your fingers curl, There is also, believe it or not, bow arm dystonia, where you have a tremor in the bow arm.
Yep.
Okay, and if you're in the back of the second violins, you may be able to hide. If you're a principal woodwind player, you're not going to be able to. If you're the first violin of the Tokyo String Quartet, like Peter Ungen, who had to leave violin playing and became a conductor. He was music director of the Toronto Symphony for many years, and he's guest conducting all over the world. I don't know, Frankie, if you're familiar with that name, but anyway,
No.
Yeah, Maestro Ungen was a brilliant violinist, and again had to leave playing violin, and he went to the enemy, as we say. But there's really woodwind players are in double jeopardy because they can develop embouchure dystonia or hand dystonia.
Yep.
So many people in major orchestras have, especially hand dystonia primarily, have had to leave their careers.
Yep.
That play wind instruments. Well, especially there are so many famous cases. The piccolo player in the Boston Symphony, the principal oboe in the Chicago Symphony, Alex Klein, a genius oboist, and his fingers started to curl and slide off the keys. And he tried everything. He had keys rebuilt. He did Botox. He did everything possible. And then when we go back to the famous pianists who were the granddaddies of musician dystonia, all right, Leon Fleisher was really the first person diagnosed with musician dystonia, all right? And that's because for 25 years, he went to the ends of the earth to find out what was going on. He had carpal tunnel surgery. His fingers started to curl when he was in his early 30s, 1964, and he was not diagnosed until 1988, where a crackpot neurologist at Harvard said, this has to be a dystonia. All right, and it was the first official diagnosis as a musician with this neurological movement disorder dystonia. And at this point, maybe I should talk a little about the mechanics of dystonia. Dystonia, errant signals from the motor section of the brain can affect any part of the body. There are genetic varieties, which they don't think the musician adult onset varieties are, but there are genetic varieties that will spasm every muscle from head to toe. And most of the kids will end up in wheelchairs with early onset generalized dystonia. And that's the most devastating variety that they've developed surgeries for. And but that's basically head to toe dystonia. And then you have the most common variety, hundreds of thousands of people in America alone that spontaneously affected in their neck and shoulders, where the motor section of the brain just decides to start spasming neck and shoulders. Spasmodic torticollis or cervical dystonia. And we've seen people walking down the street with this where they have neck spasms, head off to the side or head moving a lot. And this is dystonia at its worst because it's very painful and it's 24/7. Another variety, blepharospasm, which is dystonia of the eyelids, where people blink uncontrollably. Some of them, the eyelids are spasmed shut so that they're legally blind, actually.
Wow.
So there are many, many devastating varieties. In the words of Leon Fleisher, we're the lucky ones. You know, if I don't play the horn, I'm fine.
Yeah.
And again, when he would take his fingers off the keyboard, it was his fourth and fifth fingers that would curl. He would take his hand off the keyboard and they would straighten out.
Yeah, wow.
So, which is again why I was going to say, and why it's so difficult to diagnose, because it is task specific and it is pain free.
Yep.
So That's
I guess it goes back to awareness and yeah, people like Leon, like that, come out and just say, no, what is this, and spread that awareness, and that's what gets the word out there. That's what normalizes it. That's what gets people talking about it and recognizing it. And
right.
is
Starting in 2000, Dr. Frucht and I started writing articles for every major musician publication, and everything from the Flutist Quarterly to the Trumpet Journal, and then also he started doing a lot of research with musician patients, and the majority of in America, the majority of studies published on musicians with dystonia have been from Dr. Frucht. So he's the most renowned now at his publications in the neurological journals. And we go to Europe with the Institute for Musician Medicine and Music Physiology in Hanover, Germany, Eckhard Altenmüller, who is unfortunately retiring next March, forced out because when you work for the government, they have mandatory retirement ages. So, So if you're in the Berlin, Berlin Philharmonic.
It's a great episode with him, and we had a great chat. He told me he was retiring. Yeah, lovely man.
Right. So Eckhart, Eckhart has seen probably the most musician patients over the last 30 years, since the 90s when he took over that institute. And then Dr. Frucht is number 2 now in the world. People come from all over the country, all over the world to see him also. Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, we started creating so much awareness and publishing so many articles that, surprise, surprise, musicians throughout the world know about dystonia now. And so the neurologists laugh at me and say, you did your job so well, you worked yourself out of the job. And what's happened is they have patients coming in now where their first visit, not their 35th visit, is to a movement disorder neurologist. And they walk in and say, I think I have dystonia. And so they are absolutely thrilled, the neurologists around the world, because the homework's already been done and they can just talk about the feasibility of maintaining their career and what that's going to entail, and if they can help them. If they're candidates for botulinum toxin or possibly others, systemic pharmaceuticals, many of them are hard to tolerate. Again, because they're head to toe, and if they end up working in the embouchure, wow, wouldn't that be great? So, they rarely do.
So it's amazing what you two have been able to achieve and set up, and the legacy that will live on from that. And I guess my next question, probably my last question, is your advice. So, I mean, with the Embouchure Project, we're trying to set up a network to find effective treatment, almost like a buffet. So you're a musician, you've got an issue, and you come to what we're trying to set up is an organization where you can come and you can get not only access to a neurologist, but a psychologist, to professional teachers. So like a buffet of, like, just to tick off just to make sure that you are finding out, first of all, what's going on, and then who to get treatment with. What advice would you have of setting up another kind of thing like this for musicians?
My advice, first of all, Dr. Altenmüller, with his epidemiological studies, has determined now that muscular injuries will affect up to 85% of professional musicians during their careers. This is a daunting number, all right? And so I think when dealing with most musician problems, they are muscular. So they can be treated and you can recover. That's the good news, okay? And there are all kinds of methods out there for treatment. And I'm sure with the Embouchure Project, are you only dealing with embouchures? I'm sorry, I don't know. Or are you dealing with all musician issues?
Just with embouchures. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, at the moment, the doctors that we work with do other things, but
Okay. So
specifically start with, it's
in that case, yeah, focusing on embouchures, the greatest issue is overuse. All right.
yeah,
And so
agree.
um, typically, if you feel something pop, it's not good.
Yeah.
And if you have pain, it's really not good. All right. That's the thing with athletes. No pain, no gain. Well, musicians, pain, no gain.
Yeah.
And that's really important to remember. If you're in pain
Yeah.
in any way, you have to stop immediately and figure out why you're in pain and what's going on. And so I'm sure you've assembled a network, probably, I would think, of dentists and oral surgeons and maxillofacial surgeons that can determine if there's anything going on underlying.
Yeah.
That's not just a matter of a muscular overuse, which typically with an abstinence of 2 weeks to a month to 6 weeks will recover itself.
Yeah.
And so
it's not always pain, is it? Which is also a hard thing, because if there's no pain, people will just think that they can practice their way out of a problem. But yeah, it's interesting you mentioned overuse, because I think you've probably done your job too well. And as soon as a brass player has a problem, one of the only words that they throw around now is focal dystonia. But like you said, a lot of the time it's overuse. But I feel like overuse is kind of the new focal dystonia. Or not a lot of people know about that an injury can be from overuse. It's either focal dystonia or it's a mystery. And so, yeah, that's really interesting to hear you talking about in that language as well. Yeah.
Very true. If you have no pain, and typically too, I will say, people who are facing overuse problems, the pain does not stop when you take the mouthpiece off your face. All right, you still feel pain and discomfort, and that's another hint that you're facing a muscular problem.
Yeah.
All right. But with dystonia, we talked earlier today about what the symptoms are, and the fact that when you stop playing, all the muscle pulling and everything else cease typically. Yep. So that's where that's the difference. Really, you've heard today the dystonia symptoms and the symptoms of overuse, so that people can determine which one it is for them. And so, again, with muscular injuries, there are ways out. With dystonia, unless you can move your position a little bit, again, with not thwarting your technique too much, it's really it's very difficult to maintain a career, especially at a high level.
Yeah.
So,
well, Glenn, I wanted to thank you for your time, for your work, your legacy, and for talking to us today. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to get a lot out of this. So, yeah.
Well, it's our pleasure, and really, any way we can help anyone out there. The Dystonia website is dystonia-foundation.org. O-R-G. All right.
Yeah,
and
stop that out.
Right. And so, and if you want to contact me there, it's musicians at dystonia-foundation.org. And they can get through to me, and I'll help everyone I can in any way. And again, we do have medical referrals around the globe. So, which is most important, getting a diagnosis, because anyone that has an orchestral job, keep in mind, this is a disability. Okay. This is something where you should be able to have disability insurance provided. All right. And you should have your medical care taken care of, because this is a definite medical issue that insurance should pay for treatment and visits to top specialists.
Yeah, 100%.
And again, the most important thing, it's not your fault. Okay, musicians, It's not what you did or how you did it. All right.
Yeah.
It's the motor section of the brain. Yeah.
Perfectionist. What can you say? Yeah.
Just
No, you're 100% right.
Tag, we're it. Okay. That's you'll I'm sure I'm sure Gabriel in Toronto is listening to this, but same thing. That's the story. Okay. It's not our fault, and it happens, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
All right.
Again, thank you so much, Glenn. It's been fantastic. And,
well, my pleasure. Really nice chatting with you, Frankie. And I'll leave with the masterful words of Dale Clevenger, and that is, when all else fails, revert to method Z, practice.
Love it.
So to all musicians, just practice.
Just practice.
All right.
All right.
Thank you very much, Frankie.
Thank you, Glenn. Legend. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Embouchure Project podcast with me, Frankie Lacerda. The strength of this project is our network, so please go to theembouchureproject.org to sign up for our mailing list, follow us on Instagram, and join our group on Facebook. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email us at info@theembouchureproject.org. We look forward to hearing from you.